At the end of our last episode, we left the Middle East standing on the edge of a revolution. The Shah was still on the throne. Ayatollah Khomeini was still living in exile. Washington believed it still had time. Moscow was watching from a distance. And almost no one imagined that the next turning point wouldn't come from Tehran, or Washington, or Moscow. It would come from Libya. On August 31st, 1978, Imam Musa al-Sadr climbed into a car in Tripoli with two of his closest companions. Before leaving, he waved goodbye. His destination was a meeting with Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya. It looked like an ordinary diplomatic visit. Instead, it became one of the greatest mysteries in modern Middle Eastern history, because after that journey, Imam Musa al-Sadr was never seen again. No confirmed body was ever recovered. No verified location was ever discovered. No government has ever produced conclusive evidence explaining what happened. Over the decades, countless theories have emerged. Some claimed he was murdered. Others believed he was secretly imprisoned. Some argued he left Libya altogether. Colonel Gaddafi insisted that Musa al-Sadr had departed safely for Paris. Airport records appeared to support that version of events. Yet he never publicly arrived there, and nearly half a century later, the mystery remains unresolved. But the disappearance itself was only part of the story. The real question was, why did it matter so much? To answer that, we need to understand who Imam Musa al-Sadr actually was. By the late 1970s, the Shia world had two enormously influential religious figures. One was Ayatollah Khomeini, the other was Imam Musa al-Sadr. Both inspired millions of followers. Both wanted stronger political representation for Shia communities, but they did not imagine the future in exactly the same way. According to the historical accounts behind this story, Musa al-Sadr did not support Khomeini's vision of establishing an Islamic state in Iran. Yet, despite those differences, he never wanted their disagreement to become a division.
Brothers and sisters,
from his perspective, the Shia community already faced enough political pressure across the Middle East. Internal conflict would only weaken it further. That is why reconciliation remained important. Influential figures quietly searched for a way to bring both sides closer together. According to widely circulated accounts, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi believed Libya could become the place where that happened. A meeting was reportedly arranged between Imam Musa al-Sadr and Ayatollah Beheshti, one of Khomeini's closest associates. Gaddafi himself was expected to help mediate if successful. The meeting might have eased one of the most significant ideological disagreements inside the Shia world. Instead, the meeting never truly began, because the man expected to attend it simply disappeared. The shock spread far beyond Lebanon. Shia communities across the region demanded answers. Lebanon launched investigations. Iran searched for clues. Even the CIA became involved in efforts to determine what had happened. Nothing produced a definitive answer. No trace, no conclusion, only questions. Yet while governments searched for Imam Musa al-Sadr, history had already begun moving in another direction. Because every political movement creates a vacuum when one of its major figures suddenly disappears. And in 1978, that vacuum did not remain empty for long. Without Imam Musa al-Sadr, one man now stood above every other Shia leader in the region. His name was Ayatollah Khomeini, and his influence was about to grow far beyond Iran. With Musa al-Sadr gone, attention increasingly shifted toward one man, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. For years, he had lived in exile in the Iraqi city of Najaf, far from Tehran, far from the royal palace, far from the demonstrations filling Iran's streets. Yet distance wasn't limiting his influence, it was expanding it. Visitors began to meet him from across the Middle East. Some came from Iran, others traveled from Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. Many wanted guidance, others wanted answers. Some simply wanted to hear Khomeini speak for themselves. And every visitor carried those ideas back across another border. Khomeini's message was direct. He argued that Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's government had lost its legitimacy. He openly called for the monarchy to be overthrown. And he promoted the idea that government should be built upon Islamic principles. Whether people agreed with him or not, his message was becoming impossible to ignore. What made that message so powerful wasn't television, it wasn't newspapers, it wasn't radio, it was something much simpler. Cassette tapes today. They seem almost forgotten, but in the late 1970s, they became one of the revolution's most effective tools.
Supporters recorded Khomeini's speeches in Najaf. The tapes were quietly carried across the border into Iran. Once inside, they were copied again and again within months. His words were reaching universities, mosques, private homes, and crowded marketplaces. The government could control newspapers, it could censor television, but it couldn't stop thousands of cassette tapes from passing from one hand to another. As Khomeini's influence spread, even communist revolutionaries from Iran came to meet him, not because they all shared the same ideology. They didn't, but they shared one objective. The Shah's rule had to end. That growing coalition was beginning to attract attention far beyond Iran for Palestinian fighters. Khomeini represented someone who might one day support their struggle against Israel. In Egypt, members of the Muslim Brotherhood saw similarities between Khomeini's exile and their own political repression. Different movements, different goals, different countries, yet all of them were beginning to look toward the same man. Not everyone welcomed what they were seeing across the border in Iraq. One leader was watching these developments with growing concern. His name was Saddam Hussein, and unlike many others, he wasn't interested in waiting to see what happened next. He intended to stop it before it reached his doorstep. By the summer of 1978, Ayatollah Khomeini's influence was no longer confined to speeches in Najaf. His ideas were crossing borders. His supporters were multiplying. Saddam was Iraq's deputy prime minister. Officially, he was second in command, but in reality, he had already become the country's dominant political figure. For Saddam, the rise of a powerful Shia revolutionary movement next door wasn't simply Iran's problem. It had the potential to become Iraq's problem too, as protests against the Shah intensified. Saddam watched Khomeini's growing influence with increasing concern. Then, according to the historical account, he decided to act, not publicly, not through the military, but through a private conversation. On August 29, 1978, Saddam Hussein contacted Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. His message was straightforward. Khomeini had become a threat to both governments. Then came the question, if the Shah agreed, should Khomeini be permanently eliminated? If approved, the operation could move forward. It was an extraordinary moment. Inside Iran, the streets were already becoming increasingly violent. Demonstrations against the Shah were spreading from city to city. Security forces responded with overwhelming force. Tanks were even deployed against protesters. Thousands of people were arrested. Many others were imprisoned, tortured, or killed during the growing unrest. To Saddam, this seemed like the moment to remove the man he believed was helping fuel the revolution. The answer, however, wasn't the one he expected. The Shah didn't respond immediately. He consulted members of his inner circle. Only afterward did he give Saddam his decision. According to the account, the Shah dismissed the idea. He reportedly believed that Khomeini, an elderly religious scholar living in exile, did not pose a serious threat to his rule. Whether that judgment reflected confidence, miscalculation, or something else, history would soon provide its own answer. No operation was launched, no assassination attempt followed. The proposal simply ended there. At the time, it probably seemed like just another confidential exchange between two governments, but viewed from history, it became one of those quiet moments that invites an uncomfortable question. What if the answer had been different? We'll never know. What we do know is that Khomeini remained alive, and within months, the revolution accelerated even further. Ironically, Khomeini himself no longer believed Iraq was a safe place to remain. Pressure around him continued to grow. His advisors began discussing another destination, somewhere that offered something Najaf never could: global attention. They proposed France. At first, Khomeini refused. Leaving one Muslim country for a Western nation didn't fit the mission he believed he had been given, but his supporters continued to persuade him. Eventually, he agreed, not to Paris itself, but to the quiet village of Neauphle-le-Château, just outside the French capital. It seemed like a temporary move. Instead, it would transform his revolution into an international story. When Ayatollah Khomeini left Iraq, few people imagined that the move would strengthen his revolution. On paper, it looked like a setback. He was leaving the region, leaving his followers behind, and settling in a quiet village thousands of miles from Tehran. It hardly looked like the beginning of a revolution. In reality, it became one of its greatest advantages.
There were no government buildings, no military headquarters, no political rallies, just a religious scholar living in exile. At least, that's how it appeared. The location changed everything. In Najaf, Khomeini had spoken mainly to those willing to travel and meet him. In France, the world came to him. Within just a few months, journalists from across Europe, the United States, and the Middle East began arriving at his doorstep. Television cameras followed. Newspapers requested interviews. International news agencies suddenly treated him as one of the most important political figures in the region. A man who had once spoken to small gatherings was now speaking to the world. Most of those interviews were conducted in Persian. But standing beside Khomeini were translators who understood something beyond language. Many had spent years studying or living in Europe and the United States. They understood how Western audiences interpreted political movements, and that mattered because translation isn't simply about changing words. Sometimes it shapes how an entire movement is understood, rather than presenting Khomeini primarily as a religious leader seeking an Islamic state. Many interviews focused on different themes: the Shah's corruption, political repression, human rights abuses, public dissatisfaction, the growing anger inside Iran. Those issues were real, and they became the lens through which much of the international press viewed the revolution. Meanwhile, governments were trying to understand where all of this was leading. Washington knew Khomeini opposed the Shah. Saudi Arabia knew his influence was growing. The CIA followed events closely. But understanding a movement and predicting where it will end are rarely the same thing. Many policymakers recognized parts of Khomeini's vision. Few appeared to grasp its full political implications, or perhaps they believed another threat was even more urgent for the United States. The greatest fear wasn't necessarily an Islamic revolution. It was a communist revolution. The Cold War shaped almost every strategic calculation Washington made. If the Shah collapsed, who would replace him? Would Iran become an Islamic republic? Or would revolutionary groups inspired by Ali Shariati and other Marxist organizations pull the country toward the Soviet Union? That possibility carried enormous consequences. Iran wasn't just another country. It bordered the Soviet Union. It controlled access to the Persian Gulf. And it sat atop some of the world's largest oil reserves. Losing Iran to Moscow would have fundamentally changed the strategic balance of the Cold War. As a result, much of Washington's attention remained fixed on communist organizations, while American officials searched for signs of Soviet influence. Another movement continued growing in plain sight, one built not around Marxist ideology, but around religion. Networks of loyal supporters, and a leader who was now speaking to the entire world from a quiet village outside Paris. The revolution had entered a new phase, and back in Tehran, time was running out for the Shah. By January 1979, Iran had reached the point of no return. Months of demonstrations, political unrest, and violent confrontations had steadily weakened the Shah's government. Every attempt to restore order seemed to produce even greater resistance inside the country. Many people no longer believed reform was possible. They believed the monarchy itself had reached its end. The Shah understood the situation was slipping away, and he quietly prepared to leave Iran. Before departing, he appointed Shapur Bakhtiar as prime minister and transferred executive authority to him. Then, on January 16, 1979, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and Empress Farah Pahlavi arrived at Mehrabad Airport outside Tehran. It was their final official farewell. Soon afterward, the Shah boarded a Boeing 707. The aircraft lifted into the sky, crossed the Nile, and landed in Egypt. There, President Anwar Sadat received him with full state honors. For the Shah, it was the beginning of exile. For Iran, it marked the end of more than 2,000 years of monarchical rule. Back in Tehran, the atmosphere changed almost immediately. Crowds that had once shouted, "Death to the Shah,"
Allahu Akbar,
now celebrated with a different chant. The Shah has fled. Across the country, statues of the monarch were pulled down. Symbols of royal authority disappeared from public squares. The monarchy wasn't simply losing power. Its place in Iran's national identity was being dismantled before the world's eyes. Yet victory did not mean unity. The revolution had removed one ruler. It had not removed every disagreement. Supporters of Ali Shariati had already lost the intellectual who inspired them. Many followers of Imam Musa al-Sadr still hoped he might somehow return. Others placed their faith entirely in Ayatollah Khomeini, whose return from France now seemed inevitable. Different movement, different expectations, but one destination. The monarchy was gone. The question now was, what would replace it for Saudi Arabia? That question carried enormous consequences. The kingdom had supported the Shah until the very end. Now, an entirely new government was emerging across the Persian Gulf, one built upon a revolutionary ideology that challenged the existing regional order. Israel was watching just as carefully. Khomeini openly supported Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian cause. Relations that had once existed between Tehran and Israel were rapidly approaching a breaking point. Another strategic balance was beginning to shift. And then there was the United States. For Washington, the revolution represented more than the collapse of a friendly government, and many Iranians continued to associate the United United States with the 1953 overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh when the CIA supported the operation that restored the Shah's position. Now, the political order America had helped sustain for decades was collapsing before the entire world. Yet, even during the revolution's final months, the United States never launched a direct effort to preserve the monarchy. One explanation offered by the historical account is that Washington, still shaped by the experiences of Vietnam and earlier Cold War confrontations such as Cuba, was reluctant to become deeply involved in another unpredictable crisis. Whether that judgment proved wise or not, its consequences would soon reach far beyond Iran. Because 1979 was not just the year of the Iranian Revolution, it became one of the most consequential years in modern Middle Eastern history. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and revolutionary students stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran, triggering a hostage crisis that would capture global attention. Individually, each event was significant. Together, they transformed the strategic landscape of the Middle East. The rivalry was no longer confined to one country. It now stretched across the entire region. And that's why the story of the Iranian Revolution cannot end with the fall of the Shah, because revolutions don't stop at national borders. They reshape alliances, they redefine enemies, and sometimes they create rivalries that last for generations. The revolution that began inside Iran was now becoming a struggle involving Saudi Arabia, the United States, the Soviet Union, Israel, and much of the wider Islamic world. The countdown we began in the last episode had finally reached zero, but the real geopolitical game is only beginning, because in geopolitics, the fall of a government is rarely the end of the story.